Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 2 p.m. and we are just about to start our webinar. My name is Stefan Andreetti, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on this webinar dedicated to process modeling applied to the medical sector. Now the camera will be turned off and we will be back during our conclusions. Just before we start, let me give you a few words about the GoToWebinar platform and how to operate the control panel. You can use the orange arrow to minimize the control panel to the right. In the audio section, you can check for your audio settings, and by default, the microphone will be turned off for all participants during this presentation. At any time during the presentation, feel free to type your questions in the designated area, and during the final Q&A session, I will get back to you and answer these questions. So let's have a quick glance about our company. Transvalor is a French company founded more than 30 years ago. It is headquartered in the Sofia Antipolis Technology Park, located in south of France near Nice. We developed and commercialized simulation software for process modeling, and our core business is dedicated to the manufacturing industry. Important is to mention that our activity is also driven and supported by researchers, and specifically we have strong links with the CMAF, which is a research lab from Mines ParisTech, and this lab is devoted to material science and manufacturing processes. Transvalor offers a large panel of solutions, and we will see in this presentation how this software can be applied to manufacturing of medical devices and biomechanical applications. So here is our agenda. After a brief introduction, I will present a series of applications related to the manufacturing of medical devices. And then we will move to a more innovative domain with biomechanical applications. Finally, leading to our conclusions and perspectives. So, as a matter of context, it is important to remind that medical devices are subject to very strict regulations. At the European level, the devices are classified into different classes, and the regulations will turn effectively into application on the 26th of May 2021, so next year. Most of the simulations conducted on the manufacturing process side are related to class 3 devices like implantable devices or stent. And these are the ones of the highest risk. So therefore, this is where modeling can be beneficial to anticipate defects and shorten compliance procedures. Okay, let's move now to the first part of the webinar and focus on manufacturing techniques. Transvalor's software portfolio offers a large range of applications dedicated to the medtech sector, including forging and casting of implantable medical devices such as prostheses, and also structural, or sometimes we call it performance-based analysis, to see the behavior of the component under in-use conditions. Among Transvalor software suite, Forge is the one dedicated to metal deformation at the solid state. The following pictures are related to a use case conducted in partnership with the French group Marle. It is reflecting the forging of a femoral stem made of stainless steel. With Forge, any sort of metals can be modeled, including specialized alloys such as titanium or cobalt chromium alloys. So typically in this example, the same prosthesis can be made of titanium alloy. It is interesting to note that the complete forming sequence can be simulated, and this is what is demonstrated in this example. First of all, on the top left picture, right here, you can see the initial stage, which consists in a section reduction to narrow one side of the metal piece. Then come the bending stage, which is what you can see on the bottom left picture. So the bending stage to curve the metal piece and get the preform. Then this preform, this is this first animation, this preform is upset, forged. This is the initial forging stage, the blocker stage. And then comes, this is the next animation, then comes the final finishing stage, the last forging stage. So you can see that any step of the process can be simulated from the initial section reduction down to the final forging operation. At any steps of the simulation, you can look at a large variety of results: temperature, stresses, deformation ratio, grain flow, hardness. You can also study metallurgical aspects such as grain size, evolution, or a recrystallized fraction. Obviously, you can look at all these results, observe these results on the surface of the component. This is what you can see on the left picture. But you can also look at inside the product. This is the picture on the bottom right side, where thanks to cross sections, we can use these features to get deeper into the analysis. You can note also that point tracking features or length plot can be used in order to understand more specifically what happened on a given point of the workpiece. In addition to master the component properties, simulation is also great to reduce manufacturing cost. And in forging, two main costs are related to quality control and tooling. On the quality control side, simulation helps to anticipate defects occurring during the forging. The animation here on this on the left side shows how, if you start with a bad freeform, this can lead to a lap formation. This is what you can see with the small red dots in this animation. And so the software can track how the lap is created and how it will evaluate. And so basically, it is important to understand if the lap remains inside the component, this is bad, or if it is pushed away into the flash. In that case, the risk is much lower. The second aspect is regarding toolings. Forge software can predict abrasion wear on dies together with tensile or effective stresses developed during the forging. The picture that you can see on the right-hand side is showing the maximum areas of wear in the impression die. It is interesting to note that the most critical zones, the one in red, you can see right here. So the most critical zones are observed in the blocker stage rather than on the finisher stage. So you can see that we have more red into this impression die for blocker, and we have less abrasion in this impression related to the finisher stage. In these circumstances, simulation can be easily used to, for example, optimize the initial billet cut weight, and consequently, forging designers can expect to increase tooling lifetime by nearly 20% by reducing abrasion and tonnage. Okay, let's move now to casting applications with TheraCast software. This software is dedicated to metal casting and solidification. So TheraCast is able to simulate any sort of casting technologies. including sand casting, low pressure, high pressure die casting, shell gravity casting, and many others. With the software, the casting designer can visualize and understand the metal flow during the pouring phase. This is what you can see on the animation. This is an example of top pouring of different parts for knee implant. It can also anticipate most common defects like misruns, shrinkage, or porosity that can occur during solidification. In the field of medical devices, one technique is specifically used. This is the investment casting. Before we were, another name was used as lost wax casting, but we are talking about the same technique. This casting technique is used, for example, to produce knee joint replacement. And with this technique, a cluster of parts is designed and every parts are cast together with a top pouring. What you can see on the right side, right here, this is the temperature evolution. Let me try to start this animation once again with the temperature evolution. That's it. And the animation that you can see on the left side right here is showing the evolution of the liquid fraction. So it is important to understand where solidification takes place, and especially to make sure that final solidification will occur either in the gating system right here, or in the feeder in this zone, in order to avoid defects that could occur into the parts. So please note that recent improvements in Theracast software enable the automatic hollow shell generation in order to create the ceramic shell around the cluster of parts. This is what we can see here on this picture, where we can see the ceramic shell which is surrounding the cluster of parts. And the second important feature is the ability to take into account radiation effect, and more specifically, what we call the surface-to-surface mode, such as every part, what we can see here, one part right here can interact with the others in terms of radiation. And this is a crucial phenomenon to take into account in order to have the correct temperature distribution into the parts. In this slide, we said that as we mentioned earlier, simulation is very useful to highlight solidification defects. So this is what we can see on these slides. So defects we have two different kinds of defects. The first one is the one that we call the open shrinkage defects. So this is what we can see here on this right picture. So typically when the defect goes on the outside external surface, and we can have inner defects, so inside within the part. This is the shrinkage porosity, and this is typically what we can see right here on the right picture when we have defect inside the workpiece. So if open shrinkage occurs in the gating system or in the top feeder, this is okay, in fact, because obviously this does not represent any risk with respect to the parts. And the picture that we can see here on the left side is also showing the ability with Theracast to conduct a fully coupled thermomechanical analysis, such as we can see the deformation of the shrinkage area. Once again, if we are back to the picture to the right, what we can see here this time into the part, these are the shrinkage porosities, and this time the risk is much higher because obviously it can impact directly the product quality. So here, after this simulation, it would be, let's say, more than interesting to double check these two parts right here and right here, because the software is predicting a possibility of inner porosities. Interesting also to conclude on this casting aspect is the fact that due to radiation effects, these can have some impact on the metallurgical properties. The picture, excuse me, shows the difference observed on the grain structure if the radiation phenomena between the parts is taken or not into account. What we can see right here on the left side, this is the pattern that we obtain in terms of grain structure if self-radiation is inactive. And we can see that we have, let's say, almost a uniform grain structure. On the right side, we can see the same result, but this time if self-radiation is active. And this time we can see that we have a much larger grain growth. So depending on the cast alloy, this can be very important for the final product quality to consider the impact of these radiation effects. Okay, so now to conclude this first part, let's talk about structural or performance-based analysis that we can conduct as well with Transvalor software. This slide illustrates the simulation of a compression expansion cycle with a stent made of nitinol. What is nitinol? Nitinol is a high-performance shape memory alloy. The simulation allows to predict the stress evolution when the stent is inserted into the artery. The graph that we have here on the bottom right-hand side shows the pressure evolution on the artery wall once the stent is in place. So other similar applications are possible, like for instance the study of artificial cardiac valves and their behavior inside the human body. So there's a reasonable large range of applications that we can do under this scope of testing the devices and their mechanical behavior under in-use properties. Okay, let's move now to the second part of this webinar, which is dedicated to biomechanical applications. So, the different slides that I'm going to present are reflecting the work achieved at the CMF laboratory, and especially the research teams conducted by Dr. Yannick Tillier. This team is working on two main areas of research. The first is to characterize the biological materials. All the materials used in the field of, let's say, biomedical applications can be very different from the standard, I would say, metal or plastics that we are usually obviously using in forming processes. These materials can have complex behavior. They can be sensitive to the external environment, so sensitivity to the light, sensitivity to the humidity or whatever. So at the CMF, the team are developing special devices in order to identify and characterize the mechanical properties, and eventually used some inverse or reverse analysis in order to identify these material parameters. Once this job has been done, the second side of the research is to implement these material characteristics inside models, inside, let's say, equations that can be used by the solver. And so typically, some work has been achieved in order to, let's let's say, introduced and understand the hyperelastic behavior of the biomechanical materials. So this will help in order to have aided design for medical devices like breast implants, heart valves, and so on. And also, and this is what we're going to see in this case study, to develop some kind of assisted surgery for gynecology, ophthalmology, and in the context of this study, maxillofacial surgery. So here is our case study. We are going to talk about a specific surgery called the destruction osteogenesis. So what is the context? As you can see on the picture, mandibular incisor crowding can happen. And in that case, obviously, we need to find a technique in order to push these two teeth in their right position. So as mentioned here, this is reflecting usually a transverse bone deficiency, and usual teeth extraction and expansion protocols can be used in order to place the teeth in their right position. But sometimes this treatment might be a little bit unstable, and this is why, let's say by the end of nearly 1997, excuse me, a new surgical technique, a new surgical alternative has been developed, which is called the mandibular midline distraction osteogenesis. So, what are we talking about? This surgery is used in order to reconstruct skeletal deformities and to lengthen bones of the body. This technique has been used initially in the field of orthopedics, but today it is more and more used in the context of maxillofacial surgeries. How does that work? It's quite simple. First, the bone, the mandible, is fractured into two segments. This is what is called a corticotomy. Then the two bones, left and right, will be gradually separated with a special device, tooth bone. And so time to time, and here this is what we can see a little bit on this picture to the right, bone and soft tissues will be reconstructed. So the rate for this, let's say, expansion phase is about 1 millimeter per day until the gap is about 1 centimeter. So when the desired length is reached, this is where the solidification phase can start. And as I just mentioned, this is where the step-by-step bone and soft tissues will be naturally reconstructed by the human body. So this technique, as mentioned, has this extreme advantage of increasing both bone and surrounding soft tissues. And when everything is let's say, when we are reaching the right gap, the right clearance, we have enough space, then a classic orthodontic treatment is used in order to replace, to push the two incisors in their right position. So this is what we can see on the bottom right picture. So this is the context of the surgery. Let's have a look now to how this has been, let's say, applied to biomechanical simulation. The objective is to develop a full 3D finite element model in order to simulate the entire process of the DOJ, destruction osteogenesis. It happens that in practice, during this operation, some chronic pains has been, let's say, felt by the patients, and this was probably due to some small bone movements. So the objective of the study is to evaluate the biomechanical effects of the surgery on the TMJ, which is the temporomandibular joint. Up to now, I mean, before this study has been conducted by Yannick Tillier and his team, former models have been, or tentatives have been done, but none of them were including the teeth in the model. And also, there are no reported studies showing a stress distribution in the temporomandibular joint during the jaw closure. So the objective of this study was to, let's say, make a step, getting deeper into the modeling and its accuracy. So when you want to conduct 3D finite element modeling, you need to have data. And the first data that you need in these circumstances are the bones, the different tissues, so all the data related to the human body. So for the purpose of this study, a 30-year-old male, healthy patient with a full dentition has been used. And then different techniques like computerized tomography or magnetic resonance imaging have been used in order to scan the different, let's say, components of the body: the skull, the bones, the teeth, the articular disc, the connective tissues. All these different, or let's say, separate entities have been represented with a surface mesh and then with the volume mesh, thanks to different software, Admira for the surface mesh and Forge Solver for the volume mesh. So the video that you can see right now, so it goes very slowly because it shows each of these entities, the skull here, for example, and the 3D model which has been used, the mandible, okay, the different side, the teeth, and the different connective capsule, articular disc, and so on. So it is important to note that with this model, this patient, there is a natural asymmetry existing on the patient, and we will see the impact of this point on the final result. And you can appreciate how, let's say, how fine is this model and the size of the model with the number of tetrahedrons. So after reaching or completing this first step of getting the geometrical data, to set up the simulation, obviously we need to define mechanical properties, friction properties, and movements. So different mechanical behaviors have been applied to the tissues, to the hard tissues, soft tissues, to the bone as well. With respect to friction, some sticking conditions have been defined between connective tissues and the bones, between the teeth and some of the cancellous bones as well. And low friction conditions have been applied between disc and bones, the mandible and the teeth, etc. Okay. With respect to the movement of the mandible itself, it has been modeled using force vectors in order to define the magnitude, the amplitude of the movement, and also its origin and its direction. All of this in order to be compatible with anatomical measurements. So now we can see first videos, animation showing the simulation. So two models have been completed. On the left, the model without the distraction, so without the surgery, and to the right, you can see the bone right here between the two. You remember that due to the surgery, the bone has been, the mandible has been fractured into two segments, and new bone has been automatically naturally created by the human on the human body. So the simulation is comparing model A without distraction osteogenesis with respect to model B to the right with the surgery. This is an animation showing the displacement applied, the mechanical condition applied, again on the left without the surgery, and the model to the right with the surgery. And all the objective was to see how stresses were developed depending on the jaw closure. So we will see results at different jaw closure ratio. This animation is showing some cross-section inside the model. I told you before that we have the ability to make cross-section inside the model and see, for instance, how stresses were developed, especially in this region right here near the condyle. And this is where we can see the movements of the different bones and articular disc in this region, and see how stresses were developed in this location. Another video in order to understand and locate the region of interest. This is the region of interest, so the stress distribution in the articular disc. And so we are going to see a little bit more in detail how the stress are developed into the right disc and also into the left disc into this region. So this slide summarizes the main results of the study. So the picture on the left side right here is representing on the column on the left. So this is model A, so without distraction osteogenesis, and the column to the right is model B with distraction osteogenesis. You can see for each configuration the stress distribution into the articular disc, the left disc and the right disc, and also for different value of the jaw closure, 8 mm, 6, 4, up to 2 mm, which is the smallest jaw closure. What can we observe? First is, and this is due to the we said the natural asymmetry of the patient. This asymmetry can be observed on the results. The pattern of stress that you can see on the left disc is different from the one on the right, and we can make this observation whether we are talking about model A or model B. Now, if we concentrate on the results observed for a 2 mm jaw closure, which is the distance between the incisor, we can see also that the peak of stress is observed into this medial lateral band right here, and same thing right there. Okay, so it's just like if you could see a line crossing the disc, and the stress are maximum along this line. Now, if we compare the stress results between model B and model A, we can see that the stress are slightly higher in the articular disc with model B, so with the distraction osteogenesis. So that could be a reason for explaining the chronic pains, even if the author of the study were saying that it may not be high enough. The difference observed in terms of stress is greater in the case of model B, but it is not double the value also. So, however, the model can be used to anticipate stresses in case of different loading case. So every time we can study the movement of the bones after a trauma or after an accident, this can be, the simulation can be very, very useful. And last statement is to say that probably also the reason for the chronic pain may depend on the rate and the frequency of the distraction. You remember that I mentioned in a previous slide that the distraction was the displacement of the bone was about 1 millimeter per day until reaching 1 centimeter. So if a smaller rate was applied, for example, only 0.5 millimeter per day, it seems like this is causing less pain on the patient. So it is time to move to our conclusions. So, okay, here I'm back. So to summarize, what is the added value brought by simulation? We have seen that for the medical sector, we can conduct different types of simulation. Process modeling, performance-based, so that was the first part of the presentation with forging, casting, and then when we were able to study the behavior of the stent under in-use condition. The second type of simulations are biomechanical and probably moving towards also multiphysics simulation. So for the context of the design of manufacturing of medical devices, simulation brings several benefits. Definitely, we can increase the process reliability by anticipating defect, by being able to test all the different process parameters, and reducing the costly trial and errors and prototyping phase. We can definitely accelerate time to market. The second aspect is to master the impact of the process onto product final performances. So we can guarantee the in-use properties, hardness, grain flow, these type of properties. We have seen the great example of the impact of radiation onto the grain structure. And also we can establish the link between properties inherited by process simulation and the way that we can use this property into product performance analysis. So all of this in order to boost the engineering, in order to create more innovative and competitive medical devices. On the second part, we have seen more research activities and new possible areas involving biomechanical applications. It is clear that these applications are generally more complex and they need a strong support from the research lab, from R&D activity. But it is interesting to mention that other studies have been already conducted. For example, regarding cochlear implants, breast prostheses, and the behavior of heart valves as well. So these new types of simulation, I would say, are very much interesting for us in order to increase the robustness and the reliability of the software. You have understood that the biomechanical application have been made using Forge Solver. So we are very far from forging, but it is proving that the solvers integrated into Transvalor software are very robust and can fulfill the specific requirements, especially having bones and tissue behaviors, the ability to deal with contact management with several deformable and multi-bodies analysis. So all of this is proving that Forge Solver, generally speaking, Transvalor solvers, are pretty much robust and able to deal with these, let's say, unconventional situations. Final word is to say that on the biomechanical aspect side, industrial partnerships and research projects are very welcome, because definitely we need to improve and keep progressing in that field for the most, let's say, benefits of the medical sector. So I'm now happy to take your questions. This is I have reached the end of this this webinar.